Bill Henshaw here again, Constitutional Crisis Channel. And this video really is going to be somewhat off the cuff because my friend just brought to my attention, and I just saw about a 2 or 3 minute video by Robert Reich. You know, one that Rush Limbaugh had a lot to say about years ago when he was first starting out on his TV and radio stuff. And Reich is on there talking about getting rid of the Electoral College. Now, here's a person that I really do think, for the most part, acts in good faith, which is a hell of a lot more you can say for most of these bastards, especially the graduates of Harvard and Yale, Berkeley, you name it. But he seems to think that, the person that wins the presidency should be the one that wins the popular vote. Wrong-o. That's not how it works. It was not designed to work that way. And despite what he says in this video, you can't change this in any way except by amending the Constitution, which, as far as I can see, is never going to happen because you're not going to get any of the states in the South, where I'm from, the old South in my case, to ratify an amendment like that would in effect cut their throats. So what he's claiming is an initiative that's been signed on by 10 or more states in the District of Columbia, and they have like 150 electoral votes at their beck and call, and Reich is claiming that, and it's true in a limited sense here, where Article 2 does say that, the state legislatures have control over how the electors are awarded. That's absolutely true. I get that. I agree with it. What he misses here, among other things, are, and my documents prove it, the ones of you that have both of my document packets, you can see it for yourself, and I offer a triple your money refund on my packets. We'll get to that a little later. If you can prove me wrong on any of these four main unopposed issues that I advocate. The big one here for this purpose is there are no states. At least none that would be recognized by the framers of the Constitution and those that voted to adopt it. There are none. Full story for another day, but the point is there are none. So if that's the case, you don't have any state legislatures whatsoever, and nobody to regulate the electors. Therefore, what I now argue in my various pleadings is, among other things, that the office of the president is vacant. And I mean a lot more than in an intellectual sense, especially with the disappointing administration to this point. It's vacant. It's not there because with no electors, no electoral college, no president. Simple. But he seems to think, and I don't know how much history he knows. I'm going to give you a brief history about this issue just so you know. I would assume that Reich knows more of this than not. But that said, there have been occasions, as you know, that the person that did not win the popular vote was actually won the presidential election. The first time, actually not the first time, the most notorious time, I guess, is the election of 1876, Samuel J. Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes. And there were some really weird things that went on there because, at one point they reached the point where Tilden had 168 electoral votes, Hayes had 154, with only 15 left. And they were in states where the return of the electors was somehow disputed. In other words, it wasn't clear what slate of electors that these states, in Arkansas and Oregon were two of them, sent, to give their votes on the day the electors voted in the Electoral College. So there were some machinations that went on in Congress that was controlled by Republicans at the time. And wouldn't you know, Hayes got all the votes from those three states, and he wins the election by one electoral vote. What a lot of people don't know is that the census of 1870, upon which this election was based, was rather a bit flawed, and apparently, to say the least, there were some serious problems with it, to the point that had the census been properly done in 1870 and the states had the electors that they were supposed to have had, none of this nonsense would have happened with this election. Tilden would have won and become president. That's the backstory that not a whole lot of people know. Now, another quickie on this subject, just so you know, 1824, the election with John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, and the first time that Andrew Jackson, my second or third favorite president, although he didn't win this election, he loses the election, but what happens here is nobody has a majority of the electoral votes, and therefore this throws it in to the House of Representatives for the first time, And Jackson had a lot more votes going in. He had 99, and I think Adams had like 75 or whatever. But it goes into, Congress, and who the hell knows what happens here. But Adams comes out and wins by a very narrow margin on the electoral vote and becomes president. And that really incensed Andrew Jackson, who went on and won the next two elections, if you don't know, 1828 and 1832. And by comfortable margins in both cases, significant in 1832 because the central platform in his presidential campaign was to get rid of Nicholas Biddle and the Second Bank of the United States, and he damn well did it. Which brought on, just real quickly so you know this, the first financial panic in the country in 1837. And about that, it gets interesting because guess who made a lot of money there? A company you probably never heard of, George T. Peabody. And they got a lot of money out of the Rothschild's banks in England in order to be able to do it. And like I say, you've never heard of them. You've heard of the company it later became, J.P. Morgan Guaranty Trust. That's how the bastards made all this money. Well, I'm getting a little far afield here, but I want to give you a little history lesson about this. And then, of course, we had Bush and Gore. I'm not going to go into that a lot right now. I'll save that for another video. But the point is, you simply can't do what it is that he wants to do. Because think about that. If that were the case in the states, all 10 of the biggest states, or maybe 12 of them, do together, and they had enough electoral votes, they've negated the votes of 37 or 38 other states. That is not the way a federated Republican government is supposed to be run. It's not going to be perfect in any case, but the genius of our framers in creating the Constitution like this, especially at the time, was to try to balance it as much as possible, with the agrarian South and all the farmers down there and the industrial North. And these sides had completely different issues in many areas, which ultimately did in fact lead to the war between the states. Not that slavery wasn't kind of an issue there, but it was not anywhere close to the main issue. Another discussion for another day. But this video, and if I knew how much Reich actually knew, I would know how guilty he was here. But to come out with something like this, wow, and you try to pass that by a constitutional kook like me, good luck. Isn't going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. I mean, the elections are what they are. Because like I say, me personally, I'm writing a letter to the local head of the elections here in the county I live in and saying, hey, the problem you have is with all these nice electoral forms you pass out for voting and absentee ballots, you got nobody qualified to vote. You got no elections. Don't get mad at me. I'm only the messenger here. We both know if all you have is 14th War Amendment citizens, and I've established there is no 14th Amendment, where the hell are the voters, let alone the electors that Reich is talking about here? Now, in addition, on the issue of electoral college that I've just been discussing, the people that didn't win anywhere near the amount of popular vote to become president, most people don't realize that if you look at the returns of the elections, the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln only got 42% of the vote. And yet he won enough electoral votes to get elected president. Now, if you look at it, the basic reason for this was that the Democratic Party split north and south, so they had two different candidates. Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot in the southern states, and the southern representative, whose name right now escapes me, excuse me for that, I'll get it to you later, but wasn't on any of the ballots in the northern states. So at best, Lincoln had a plurality of the popular vote in an election that probably should have gone into the House of Representatives. The problem with that being, at the time this would have occurred, that many of the southern states had already seceded from the Union and therefore wouldn't have been represented for that constitutional process to occur. That, by the way, if I can recall a recent video I did, I may do more on it later. Did the southern states have the right to secede? You bet. If they didn't, then the colonies didn't have any right to secede from Great Britain either. You can't have one without the other. Like I say, that's not a subject for today, but I just wanted to throw in the addition on Lincoln for those of you who think he's one of our greatest presidents. And he is, in my view, by the way, in the top 10. And I'm not sure how much that says for the overall quality of the list we have of 43 or 44 presidents. But I do think for the most part he acted in good faith, unlike some of my constitutional kook brethren that get all over him, for suspending the writ of habeas corpus, even if Congress delegated that power, which they didn't have the authority to do. and the Emancipation Proclamation, which was a wartime measure that freed the slaves only while the war between the states was in effect. So that said, I just wanted to throw this in and add this in because most people don't know about this election of 1860, and we'll talk more about it next time. Thank you.